I'm going to let each of my panelists here introduce themselves, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, my name is Tim Bajarin. I'm president of Creative Strategies, one of the high-tech research firms, and I also write for Fast.
Good morning, I'm Michele Dupré. At Verizon, I have responsibility for a vertical practice, and one of the practices is retail. So it's great to see you, and good morning.
Morning, I'm Rob Stott, editorial director for Dealerscope, one of the producers of CE Week, and cover the retail space, B2B retail space, so hoping to bring that perspective to this as well. So, morning.
Great. All right. So we're going to kick it off now. So everybody keeps talking about how amazing 5G is going to be. It's going to, do everything for us and be the next revolution. We see it, a lot of talk around autonomous vehicles and remote surgeries and other healthcare applications. How's it going to change retail? Who wants to jump in? Michele, you want to talk?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in, get things started in the morning. So I really do think it's going to change retail in a number of facets. And one, I think you have to look at retail and technology from how do they serve their customer, how do they run their business, whether it's within the brick and mortar, whether it's in a fulfillment center, in a distribution center. And again, you look at the adoption of technology, and it's really going to change the way that retailers can engage with their consumers. You think about, high resolution video. I think it changes the opportunity for them to engage differently. And then you think about just the immersive behavior that consumers have in a brick and mortar environment, that I think it truly allows them that improved customer experience. And you think about automation and supply chain, it certainly will enable a better experience, in that space today. So I think it's threefold in terms of what impact it has on customer experience, the consumer, what different technologies they can drive with lower latency, faster speeds, and reliability. And also when you think about fulfillment, how it can impact within the four walls of their fulfillment centers. But more importantly, even when you think about, delivering product consumers with, whether it gets to the point of autonomous vehicles or just, again, smart logistics.
Let's talk a little bit about that experience aspect, virtual reality, VR. You hear a lot of talk about that. How does it play in with 5G? Tim,
Well, there's a couple of things at the retail. I don't think my audio's on.
Here we go.
There's a couple of things at the retail, still not on. Hello, guys.
Testing.
Just pass. There.
There's a couple of things at the retail level where this becomes kind of interesting for the consumer especially. Remember, the promise of 5G is that it's faster speeds, 1 gigabit, hopefully even higher. And if you bring in the AR and VR to the consumer experience, one of the things that could happen is you could be standing in front of a product, and if it's set up with the right information link, you could actually see the product, how it works. You could ask the question of how do I set it up? I mean, there's all these type of things that can be very interesting. And in my particular case, I'm what we might be called reading directions challenged. The more visual I see about something and leading me through how to do something, especially assemble something, is even more vital. So IKEA is taking a really close look at this. How many of you have ever been to an IKEA store and looked at one of their boxes, realizing that you're going to take that home and have to put it together yourself? Two things that'll be significant. One, while you're in the store looking at that box, because right now you're just seeing a box, and outside you might see a representation of it assembled, but you may be able to see it actually in action and how it works. And then when you get home, if IKEA does this, what they're thinking of doing, especially if you either have Wi-Fi or 5G, depending on where you're setting it up, you would actually be watching the step-by-step instructions to make it happen. And so I think that, again, 5G actually has so many other areas, but when you apply it to retail, I think its ability to add visual context to what you're purchasing could be very significant.
I don't know if you want to add. I actually was at a an event that Verizon had hosted a couple of months ago, where you had some developers there showing some really cool stuff. Can you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the event that you're talking about is we've invested in 5G labs, and what it is that we've created these lab environments for the outside world to come in and really, test their applications, the opportunity for what could they do with the art of the impossible or the art of the possible with 5G. And what Maggie's referencing is that there's a really interesting app that's, again, it creates the intersection between what you would typically see in an online environment with the physical environment, and whether that's product ingredients, and one of the cool things is around being able to, with augmented reality, looking at the ingredients of a product. And if you have a nut allergy, for example, it says what products on the shelf show that they either have nuts or they don't have nuts. And again, with the society that we live in, there's a lot of allergies out there. So that's just one example of where you see that it can really be to the benefit of the consumer. And then the other piece is around product ratings. So it's not only showing you the contents, but it also is showing you the ability to, what consumers think about it. So you think about shopping experiences online, we all look at how many stars does a certain product get. This takes that type of environment to the physical environment and really puts the power of the, making that decision in the consumer's hands.
I was going to ask you, Rob, what about some things like, any kind of other AI or facial recognition? Like, how can that play into the retail space?
Yeah, there's a couple of different, even from a pure entertainment perspective, I think of, you mentioned AR and kind of what 5G is going to enable. And Third Eye, funny enough, had, in talking with examples of, entertainment applications that they're working on, as part of Verizon and 5G labs that you guys have going on. And sort of from a gaming experience, I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with Minecraft and kind of what that brings to the table. And in talking with Nick, the CEO, co-founder of Third Eye, he mentioned an application where, you could have their X2 glasses strapped on and be walking around in a city environment. And of course, all this being enabled by 5G and the super wide, ultra wide bandwidth that enables. Being able to have a personal experience and sort of an actual city experience, building these buildings or maybe seeing the example he mentioned was a dragon flying around the city, from your perspective. So it kind of takes that, whatever game that would be involved in, or, it takes the open world environments that we're used to talking about in a gaming setting and really applying it to the open world and enabling, everyone to have their own unique perspective on whatever it is that they're involved in, and not, also not having to lug around with them maybe massive computers that are strapped to them with these headsets to enable that kind of thing. With 5G, maybe it's able to be baked right into the headset that you're wearing and just make it a much more seamless experience.
So, but how do you think that would play into like the retail environment? Like, would we see, would it be like a Game of Thrones kind of experience while I'm like in the grocery store? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I even think even on a more granular level, not looking at the VR or AR perspective, from the showroom experience, being able to have this ultra wide, the massive amounts of data that needs to be transferred that 5G is going to enable. There's a panel later on this, tomorrow, I believe, that will get into 8K. And when you talk about 8K streaming services and content, obviously none of that exists right now. But the way we get there is by having 5G and what that brings to the table to, bring something like that, an 8K experience to a show floor where you can demonstrate that, impressive video technology to a consumer that's interested in shopping for that kind of TV or looking at what that content is and how it differentiates itself from 4K and what we have available to us now. So without 5G, none of that would be, possible. So that's at least one thing to look forward to.
Yeah. So we did a study on 5G not long ago, and one of the issues we were looking at is what do the consumers really want? And one thing that was pretty clear, besides higher speed connections so they could watch video when they're commuting on the train or whatever, or doing something that high speed is critical, but they wanted to be able to help them make better decisions at the retail level. And so when I talk to you about these visualizations, it's really a big part of this kind of new thinking. And when you show something like that to a consumer, the lights go on. And they have not had that experience because first of all, if you go into a store and try to even use the store's Wi-Fi, it's not reliable. 4G gives them only so much. But the promise of 5G is such a high level of speed and hopefully low latency that actual shopping experience could be very, very different.
Yeah. The other piece I'll comment on is I think that this goes outside of just the retailer, and some of the interest and some of the just conversations that we're having are with the CPGs. So the gamification, it's just like, how do they promote their brand? You think about the CPGs, they have their characters or their brand affiliation, and I think that there's an opportunity to bridge really what the CPGs want to do with promoting their brand, and then also, bridging that with the retailer and creating this, cohesive environment. And whether it's a game, whether it's video, whether it's, some level of augmented reality, I think there's just truly an opportunity for those two industries to really come together and really drive a creative environment for consumers.
Michele, you also mentioned that 5G could help with inventory and sort of, not the consumer-facing aspect of retail, but, the behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So how would it work there?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, and again, one of the examples that we've seen, it's around when you think about video, and it's around looking for inventory in that real-time environment, and then also using the ability to track and see how much inventory do you have, where is it, and it really takes it to that next level, and it makes that decision on what to do with that inventory more real-time. The other example, too, is around, looking at inventory when you have high-value items within a store, is being able to, the example we use is that you have a high-value item that we know is supposed to be in aisle 3 on shelf number 45. And with 5G, the ability to be able to track that piece of merchandise and know that if a consumer went in, knowing that it should be where it should be, but it's not, be able to real-time identify where that piece of merchandise is in the store. So I think it does it at a macro level in terms of helping define, where to put product, how to put product in a more real-time environment, but also when that customer is there looking for that great experience, it needs to, will guide them to where that misplaced item is within the store.
So I know 5G is going to be much, much faster than 4G, but there's also a lot of talking about low latency. And so what is that? Why do I care? Why is it better than 5G?
I can start with that. So latency, I think the easiest way to explain it is the time between when an action, you request an action and something happens, a response, you get a response. So one of the best examples of the impact that 5G will have on low latency that I've seen that I can attest to is something along the lines of connected car technology and what that'll do. When you're in a car driving right now, obviously there are autonomous systems and things in cars, technology in cars. Automatic braking systems, for example, that will detect how far you are from car in front, if it's stopping, making sure that you stop in time. Even just, when, the example of driving, tenths of a second can have such a major impact on you as a person, as a driver, on that car. You want to make sure, if you're going 60 miles an hour down the highway, that, when an automatic brake system needs to work, it works. So having 5G and the promise of incredibly faster reaction times and much lower latency will enable those systems to only improve, maybe bring in use cases that we haven't even thought of yet. That's just one of the, I think when I think of examples of the impact of low latency, it's in the car that I think we'll see maybe some of the biggest impact of 5G.
In that particular context,
That's okay.
in that particular context, it's life and death type scenario, right? Because if you study the autonomous vehicle concept, it gets taken to the smart city concept. So, for example, if the smart city is set up properly, the light systems will have a sensor and a communication link that will go to the car, and if it works properly, it'll tell a car 500 feet from the light that the light's going to change, start getting ready to slow down. And if that link gets severed and you have a bit of a low latency, anything could happen. But Rob is really right. When we do a little bit of work with the auto industry, and their vision is to use 5G as a part of the entire communications process of the automated driving scenario. And their biggest fear at the moment is still the low latency issue. Because even if it's a tenth of a second, it could mean life and death. So that's the biggest example where I think 5G is going to have the most impact.
Yeah.
So I know when I talk to different folks about 5G and what's possible, and people always say, we don't even know what's going to be down the road. When 4G happened, we had even...
Don't lose.
Yeah. When 4G sort of took off, maybe folks weren't really imagining Uber coming into existence. Yeah. And, we do so many things now on our phone, including a lot of shopping. I feel like that, mobile retail really seemed to take off with 4G. So in some ways, do you feel like is 5G a way to get people back into stores because you're changing the experience a little bit more, or have people really gone away from in-store shopping? Does it enable things like pop-ups and things like that to happen maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment on that. I think when you look at the amount of revenue that's still driven within brick and mortar, it's still significant. So I don't think consumers have completely deviated and abandoned in that behavior. I think what it does is that it allows the digital, and I commented on this earlier, it's like really bringing together the digital and the physical in a much different environment and in a much different level. And I think we're at the cusp of something great. And I think over time, and I commented on the 5G labs, is just the ideation that's coming out of that, I think will definitely I don't think we know exactly what the art of the possible is, but I think it's going to be more than what we expect, and I think it's going to be sooner than what we expect. And I think what we're also going to see is that you look at what innovations happening in healthcare. I think it's going to also be an opportunity where the adjacent verticals and businesses and industries, I think you're going to see cross-pollination between a great idea that happens in healthcare that slightly modified can become a really cool application within retail. So I think it's going to be, it's going to be very fascinating to see what happens. The other comment on the pop-up stores is that, again, I think most successful retailers understand how to quickly get into a market, and I think pop-up stores are clearly an opportunity. I think it just allows them to do it much faster, and again, it allows them to bring that low latency and speed into that environment today that they're somewhat restricted based on the underlying infrastructure that they bring in.
That seems to be a big trend in retail. I mean, I'm not a retail reporter, but I notice it as a consumer that they seem to be sort of everywhere. It's like the new thing, and it seems like, I guess, with this technology, it would just make that so much easier to be able to do.
Absolutely. And I think it also allows you to engage again with the consumers in a much different environment and, drive that engagement. And, you create a pop-up store and, with the power of 5G, augmented reality, virtual reality, I think you can really just drive a different behavior and a different engagement.
The other thing that we haven't mentioned is that Amazon has already used or created this concept of the Go experience, right? You walk into, and right now it's kind of like a 7-Eleven type thing, but you basically sign in when you come in, you pick up whatever you want, put in your basket, and it basically tallies it as you walk out the door, and you're out of it. I was involved with the IBM experiment on this that started like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where they were doing the same basic idea. And the concept was, here's a shopping cart, all the stuff would be there. There would be sensors. You put everything in, and then you just walk out the store. In Amazon's case, that hasn't worked quite as they expected, and now they're actually accepting cash, which is kind of funny. But they're right in that sense. I think the retail experience is going to go radically move towards that concept at some point where 5G becomes the key component. Even the stores themselves will tell you that their Wi-Fi connections just are not consistent enough to deliver this. They need a ubiquitous connection to make this work. And so I do think eventually we'll get that right. Will it be 5 years from now, 10 years? I don't know. But eventually we'll walk into a store, we'll just put stuff in our basket and walk out the door.
And you think that 5G is the enabler?
Well, from talking with the retailers, well, 4G could work depending on the quality of the signal in the region. And this is going to be the same thing with 5G in that context. One thing I will tell you, just some statistical numbers. Ericsson just did a major report that they announced this morning, and it's somewhat surprising, some of their conclusions, but basically they believe that 50% or 1.9 billion subscriptions will be in place with 5G by 2024. With 4G, it took us almost 7 years to get to those many connections, subscriptions. So they think this has the potential of taking off faster. And you can speak to this, but all of the major carriers, including worldwide carriers, are investing significant amount of money in 5G installation. And so because of the promise of 5G, and hopefully we'll have these kind of connections, and they're going to be ubiquitous, then that will make that happen. But you go to a rural area, for example, where that kind of a connection won't exist with that kind of level of continuity, then that might be a different issue.
Yeah, I'm gonna play skeptic a little bit here. Because I am a little skeptical that 5G is going to be ubiquitous and that it's going to happen anytime fast. Because when I've seen some demonstrations of 5G, unless you're right next to those radios, I mean, the drop-off is pretty dramatic. So you could be down the block from a 5G radio and like you're barely getting a signal. So I guess this is really for Michele, putting you on the spot because you're the carrier representative here. But, you know, obviously you guys are building out in large cities right now. Are you going to be able to blanket Manhattan, Chicago? I mean, right now you're in neighborhoods, right? But how are you going to be able to do that?
Yeah, so the time frame, like you said, I mean, this has been a journey that we've been on for quite some time, and it all started with the investment that we made in fiber deployment that enables then the 5G network. So, we were the first to roll out 5G home in Houston, Los Angeles, and Sacramento, and then we did 5G mobile in the two cities in Minneapolis and Chicago. And you're right, they're definitely in certain areas within those cities, but the absolute goal is to get to Chicago and get it to a much broader availability, and we will get there. And then the comment about the cities, we announced 30 cities this year. We announced 20 additional cities, which, again, you think about Chicago, Minneapolis, but some of those other cities include Little Rock, Arkansas, Des Moines, Iowa, Cleveland, Columbus. So smaller cities in terms of population. So I think we're really looking at, again, getting it out to a capacity. But again, it's going to take time, and you think about the amount of time that it took for us to get from 3G to 4G, it's going to take time. But the good news is for Verizon is that it truly is 5G. We've invested in, over $1 billion in fiber investments to make this a reality, and we are fully committed to doing it, and we'll continue to do it. And I think the success of it is when when the infrastructure's there, and you have the innovation coming from whether it's the 5G labs or even in other industries. I think it's that combination that will get us there, but it will take time.
Well, as Tim was saying, what about rural areas?
Yeah.
Is it going to be there, or is it going to be? Could it potentially be something more like, you've got a super Walmart somewhere out in the middle of I'm not going to say nowhere because those places are not nowhere, but out in the middle of a rural area, you know, do you foresee like clustering 5G, or are you going to use different spectrum to have the signal travel further, or what's that going to look like?
Yeah,
what's it going to mean for retailers? Yeah, so I think when you look at a retailer, and again, knowing that they operate in all aspects of you know, the U.S. here, I think what's going to happen over time is that, again, we will get, you know, densification across a broader base of cities, locations, suburban areas, urban areas. And, you know, our commitment is, again, to continue to drive innovation and technology. So where there is a Walmart, they may not be in the 5G footprint. There's certainly other opportunities for us to serve those customers, and we're committed to, whether it's, you know, 4G LTE with that network, or just with, you know, other solutions. So it will not create a world of, you know, we'll find a way to serve the rural community. All right. What do you all foresee as some of the challenges with 5G? I think we already sort of touched on one, which is, you know, connectivity and being able to get a broad coverage map there. But what are some other potential challenges?
Well, there's still, I don't think we actually have enough spectrum to deliver exactly what they want to do. And plus, some of the spectrums that are being proposed right now are really close to other areas where, for example, we had a case recently where the weather industry has been screaming because one of the spectrums that is being proposed for 5G would actually interfere with the same spectrum that is weather satellites, for example. I think the FCC actually does need more aggressive stance on broadening spectrum, but I do understand why they're careful for that. But that's one pitfall.
Yeah, I think one of the other challenges that will be confusing consumers is what is 5G. And again, our definition of 5G is that it's, you know, it's a new network, it's a new device, and it's a new technology. And there's been a lot of hype in the market recently of, you know, claiming other, you know, 5G networks. And again, we're sticking to exactly what I said, that it's a new network connected to a new device. And we're proud of that, very proud.
And I would argue that the other issue of 5G that is going to potentially impact acceptance will be pricing. Because we don't know what the pricing is going to be. When I talk to all the carriers, I haven't talked to you guys, but I've talked to two others, and I cannot nail them down on how they're going to price 5G services. And if it's super expensive at first, you know, who's going to buy in? The early adopters. Not that that's bad, because the early adopters will accept also some of the failures during that period. But ultimately, that's got to get into a pricing that's acceptable across the board.
And then one of the other challenges, and it kind of goes back to one of your points earlier, last question, Michele, you know, talking about the education and understanding, I don't know how technical we want to get it, of deployment of 5G, but there's a couple of different ways that 5G can be distributed, that being millimeter wave and the 6 gigahertz networks, and you know the pros and cons of going each route. You know, millimeter wave, for example, is able to provide that ultra wide bandwidth and the low latency, but you know it's been proven and shown to struggle to, you know, get through tinted windows as far as, you know, being able to deliver that network to end users. So whereas opposed to the 6 gigahertz model, which, you know, it's stronger, so it can get through those types of, you know, walls in a home and things like that. But at the same time, you might be sacrificing a little bit in terms of the latency and how wide of bandwidth you're able to provide to consumers. So education extends to beyond just what 5G is, to the different aspects of 5G and how you're able to deploy that, whether it's in an entire city environment or even just in the home.
Yeah. Oh, can I have my mic back? Sorry about this, folks. Well, one of the challenges I also see is security, right? I mean, when we're talking about, again, going into a retail space and maybe you've got facial recognition, knowing who I am, and you're collecting lots and lots of data. There's a lot of, all these devices are going to be connected to the network. How are retailers going to deal with that? How are companies going to deal with that? Whose responsibility is it? I don't know. Who wants to talk a little bit about security concerns?
Yeah, no, so in terms of, you think about any technology, speed, reliability, and now there we go, is top of mind for Verizon, and it will continue to be that. I'd say specific to retailers, again, there will be, different consumption of data. And again, I think the key is, and again, this industry in particular, if you look back in history, they've had some tough lessons to learn. And I think that they've, for the most part, are on a very healthy path. And I don't think that any of them are committed to disrupting the investments that they've made in security, around privacy, around consumer engagement. And I think that we'll just continue to see, them be committed to it, because they have been. And obviously from a network standpoint, it's been one of our top priorities, and we'll continue to make it a top priority.
As far as responsibility, it's kind of mixed. I mean, clearly the carriers have a huge responsibility in the context of protecting their connections, but the handset makers are trying to do something similar. So a Samsung, for example, has their own dedicated security layer called Knox. Apple is doing more and more in the way of security, where they're doing more of the processing on the device, and they're doing a lot of protective type things. So while the carriers bear a significant responsibility at the connection, the handset makers, especially the big ones, are going even a second level with them in order to make sure their handset levels are secure as well. But having said that, and the big thing, especially with Apple and Knox, is it's actually encrypting the data that is sent. That is not the same case with a lot of the other phones out there. So there's still going to be a lot of holes, but the responsibility is not just on the carriers. I think the handset guys play a big role on this too.
Well, I was going to say, but it also seems like retailers have to have some responsibility here too, right? I mean, because you're going to be, one of the wonderful things about 5G is you're going to be able to collect all this data about your customers in real time in your store. So, Rob, you want to talk about that?
I mean, it's going to sound a little soapboxy maybe, but it falls on, as you're saying, Tim, end to end, everyone involved in the process. So that too includes the retailer. What are you? I think it just boils down to transparency and honesty with the customer, letting them know whether it's in the store, whether it's online, how you're using their information, and what they're getting into, and offering them. I mean, maybe we could look to what Europe's done with GDPR and kind of apply that on a retail basis here in the U.S. Just being upfront with the customer about how their information is being collected, in what ways you're using it, but then too turning it around. Letting them know because data and privacy obviously is a big concern and a scary topic to tackle and educate consumers on, but maybe there is a benefit to them that you can explain to them here. Yes, you still have to opt in, and we'll let you know, be clear with you and transparent about what we're doing, but if this is something you agree to, here are all the benefits that it could provide you, and services that we're able to offer you because you're opting to let us use this information, how we will, but to an extent that's acceptable and doesn't extend too far beyond what would be necessary on the retailer's part.
Yeah, I think the key is, and you hit on this, is it's the application that the retailers are using to engage consumers. It's creating and building that trust, but it's also in turn being transparent with what information you do have, and then showing value for you being able to have that. So if they can create an environment where they know that I like certain products, services when I walk into my favorite retailer, and they can continue to, through the mobile app that I've opted in, and I've said, yeah, it's okay with, to engage with me, that they give me some incentive or they let me know of some great promotion that's happening. I think that's going to be, the give to get type of environment that I think retailers can benefit from.
So how much is all of this going to cost retailers, right? Is this going to be an expensive, I'm thinking here in my head, you've got new equipment, new service contracts, those are all just part of the game. Now you've got these security concerns that, is it going to be an expensive technology for retailers to roll out?
I think what most retailers and the customers that we're working with, they see it as an investment. And it's going to be, it's like, how do they allocate? Because again, no one has unlimited capital and unlimited operating expense. So it's being able to prioritize, how do they get the biggest return on that investment? And I think, again, when you look at retailers that have invested in technology and innovation, they've been incredibly successful. Their brands are successful. And unfortunately, those that didn't make those investments, again, you continue to see them struggle. So I think it's the balance between what do I want to do with the next, with 5G and the technologies that are going to be, available to me. How do I give a good return on the investment internally, but to the shareholders? And really create that value for their customers. So I think they really have to look at all three. But again, I think it's, there's definitely going to be capital investment that's going to be required. But again, if they can justify it, I think it will be an absolute good thing. And I think it will become a necessity for those that want to continue to be successful in their markets.
Yeah, and I actually think you used an important word. I think for them to be competitive, this is a necessity.
Yeah.
I don't think they can avoid it. And they're going to, again, how it affects their bottom line in the sense of, raising prices or whatever, but they are going to put the investment in it. Because if they don't, from a competitive standpoint, they'll be left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what should retailers be doing now to prepare, right? Because 5G's not everywhere yet, but are there things that maybe they just sit and wait? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think again the interest that we're seeing is absolutely above and beyond our expectations. And again, as I said before, it's not just the retailers, but it's the CPGs. And again, I think that they see that this is a unique opportunity for them to create something unique and different within those four walls of the store. So I think what they're all doing is preparing for, is asking the questions, what is it that we can't do today because of latency and speed? And we've challenged our, the customers that we're working with to really not just ask their technology organization, but go have those conversations with their employees, their store associates, just everyone and anyone that they could say, if we didn't have the real, the challenges with latency and speed, what could we do to create a great experience? And I think it's going to be very interesting over the next, 12 to 18 months to see what applications emerge from this, what I'd say this think tank, and really drive a unique experience for consumers.
Do you think we're going to start seeing some of this in stores in the next 12 to 18 months, or do you think it's going to take a little longer?
I think you'll see proof of concepts, and again, there's already some POCs happening out there today, not just within the retailers, but again, I go back to the adjacent, communities that I think everyone should be watching. So yeah, I do think that it's going to be 12 to 18 months, probably in a limited environment. But yeah, I do think that they're very eager to see what is, the art of the possible and what could they do with this technology in the very near and long-term future.
Great. Rob, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
I would just say, in those next 12 to 18 months, those that aren't actively involved in those early proof of concepts, just get themselves educated, keep an eye, stay in touch, whether it's with, what you're currently doing with, analyzing potential of upgrading your offerings? Is it worth it to you to make that investment? Obviously, we would sit here and say that yes, it's worth it for everyone, but in your business model, maybe you're a small independent store, maybe it's not right at the outset, prudent for you to make that jump, but sit back, educate yourselves, get in touch with whether it's the carriers to kind of learn from them about the aspects of this technology and what it brings to the table, or even others in your industry, in the retail industry, see what they're doing, talk with one another.
Probably read our stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like
go to
Dealerscope,
CNET. Go to CNET. Figure out what we're telling you to do and take our advice.
Exactly.
Great. Tim?
The last thing I want to just reiterate what I said in my first comments. I had the privilege of being in quite a bit of AR research projects. And there's no question in my mind that at some point AR, they're going to get the glasses right. We don't have it yet, and I think we're maybe 2 to 3 years away. But an AR set of glasses connected to the retail experience will be transformational. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But I've seen enough in the labs now that makes me believe that I'm going to eventually walk into that store and I'll already know, I may have even been able to program it to say exactly what I want and I walk in the door and it'll automatically take me to that spot and then show me examples of what this product does. And I just think that AR, not VR, because I really don't think VR will have as much an impact here as it does in enterprise and in training. But AR could be transformational to the retail experience.
So we're all going to be wearing glasses. I don't know about that.
Well, I don't know if you'll wear them all the time,
No.
but I think at specific points,
When I go to Target, I'll
you
throw
may
on my
want
glasses.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, I think the first step there is that, again, to create that environment, and I talked about the application earlier, is this, I think it will take many different forms. I think glasses obviously are, one of the ones that will get there eventually in futuristic, but I think there's an immediate opportunity, simple ingredients, again, to use your phone, scan and look to see what the ingredients are and whether or not it contains something you might be allergic to.
Yeah.
So.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all for
Yeah.
joining us. This was a lot of fun, and I hope everybody got something out of it.
Great.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.